Vaughn, irony doesn't live under the sort of mushroom cloud of Trumpism, but there was an irony to Mike Johnson being the speaker who greeted Donald Trump on a day like today.
Right. I mean, having him be the one welcoming him, I think, is telling of this moment that we find ourselves. But also somebody like Nancy Mace inside of that meeting room today. Donald Trump explicitly giving her a shout out after helping her win her primary just this last week in South Carolina. You know, Nancy Mace was, some of us were talking about, going to be the future of the Republican Party in the days after the January 6th attack. She was voted in, rightfully, for the first time in November of 2020. And she then made the TV rounds saying that she and others could be the voice of the new Republican Party. They needed to turn the page, move away from Donald Trump. And then I was out there in South Carolina in 2022 that summer. Donald Trump was up on stage calling her a rhino, trying to get her eliminated from office. She narrowly won her reelection. And she even told me at the time, look, the Department of Justice is going to do their work and they're going to find if anybody did a crime related to January 6th, then they will bring the appropriate charges. Well, the Department of Justice did exactly that. But Nancy Mace is speaking a different tune. And the message that was sent from Donald Trump to every other House Republican in that room was that you may have turned your back on me at one point or you may cross me at some point, but ultimately you are safe in this Republican Party if you come back and you stand beside me. Nancy Mace is the representative of that. If you take those words of hers after January 6th, when she said that she was hiding her kids that day of the attack, to where she finds herself now in the summer of 2024.
There are a lot of accounts from contemporaneous sort of social media posts about the incoherence that you highlighted in your nightly package Sunday night. Some of the non sequiturs, I think, is the most generous way to describe them. This is from Jake Sherman on Trump's meeting with the House Republicans. Quote, from Trump to House Republicans, close to exact quote, Nancy Pelosi's daughter is a wacko, said Trump. Her daughter told me if things were different, Nancy and I would be perfect together. There's an age difference, though. Jake went on, I don't know what this means, but this is what he told a group of House Rs. He talked about Silence of the Lambs' famous villain, Hannibal Lecter. There was a lot of I think his supporters call it riffing, but a lot of non-policy topics raised.
I've been covering Trump rallies for a while, and that's kind of a normal Trump rally, if I may. But perhaps House Republicans got to hear it up close up on Capitol Hill for the first time.
Like the VIP experience, kind of?
Right, a little bit more intimate. Donald Trump goes off on tangents. And look, I think this hits at the fact of, right, when we go of who is going to actually be the one to speak out within the Republican Party against him. Again, I go back to who was in that room of House Republicans. Just to start with the morning, those House Republicans. There are 10 Republicans that voted to impeach him because of the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. Effectively, 8 of those 10 Republicans were removed from the U.S. House of Representatives in 2022, in no small part because Donald Trump backed primary challengers to a good number of them. There were 2 individuals who were in that room today. The remaining 2, Dan Newhouse out of the state of Washington, David Valadao out of the state of California. Dan Newhouse is facing yet again another Trump-backed primary challenger here in the summer of 2024. Donald Trump still has them in his sight. And outside of Chip Roy of Texas, who was a big DeSantis supporter, he has held out from going and endorsing Donald Trump. The rest of the folks in that room, Bob Good and Ralph Norman, who endorsed DeSantis and Nikki Haley, respectively, they quickly got back into Trump's corner. But even from Orange County, California, in a competitive race, Michelle Steele, she was just last week at a fundraiser for Donald Trump in Newport Beach. And so really, there is no dissent in that room here, and no dissent among those who potentially could grab the ear of Donald Trump.
Sarah, the politics for them as House members is one thing. It's an entirely different calculation, and it's why you see the Trump campaign walking away from Trump's smear against soldiers who die or injured serving the United States of America, suckers and looters. I mean, you see a different scramble from the Trump campaign itself.
Yeah, well, the Trump campaign, because I think they are trying to win the people on his campaign, despite many of the way that Trump, has no interest in sort of inviting Nikki Haley voters back into the tent. The campaign is trying to figure out how to win. And they know things like suckers and losers are one of the things that are a big liability for Trump. And we hear that from swing voters all the time. I still think it's the fact that Trump did this has not penetrated super, super deeply, but for high information voters, but who are still center right. That's one of the things that they bring up pretty often in the focus groups, is that Trump sort of smears against soldiers, the fact that he, sounds like a crazy person when he talks. I am actually glad, I have to say, to have Trump back in the limelight and out of the courtroom, because I think that the way that Joe Biden wins this election in many ways is going to be about people remembering why they dislike Donald Trump so much. We talk about the double haters a lot, but I think it's important for people to understand that the voters actually don't hate Joe Biden. They think he's too old and they're not huge fans, but they do hate Trump. And when they see Trump and they see him behaving this way, they remember, oh, yeah, he's a global embarrassment to the United States. He's not a smart person. This person shouldn't be within 1,000 feet of the White House, and not the least of which the Capitol, because he fomented an attack on it. And so, good, Donald Trump, get out there, be Trump, remind America who you are, and let's hope that America rejects you again, like they did last time in 2020.
So, Tim, I spent an inordinate amount of time really trying to understand arsonists and what they do today to make sure that was accurate. And it is a criminal mind for an arsonist to want to go back and admire the scorched wreckage. It is unprecedented. I couldn't find in the couple folks that I spoke to out west anyone who had been celebrated by the people who lost homes or lost structures or lost land in a fire set by an arsonist. I mean, the parallel is stunning when you think of it that way. He sought to attack the building. His supporters went with weapons. Your investigation unveiled presidential detail audio of the kinds of weapons. They included AR-style weapons, a guy in camouflage hanging from a tree between the White House and the Capitol. They were engaged in, quote, medieval combat, the likes of which Officer Gonell hadn't seen since his time in combat in the military. I mean, just remind people what is beyond dispute, what the facts are of what Trump did on January 6th.
Well, he sat and watched, Nicole. He set the fire to follow your arsonist example, and then he sat by and watched it burn, right? He gave an incendiary speech encouraging people to march to the Capitol, to fight like hell, or you won't have a country anymore. And then when that fuse was lit by those incendiary words, he sat back and he watched, despite repeated attempts by people very close to him, including his own family, his own chief of staff, his own White House counsel. He sat by, and by all accounts, he watched the violence unfold. He was very plugged in, as always, to television news coverage, and he just refused to issue any kind of statement asking that people disperse, asking that people go home. To the contrary, what he did was he issued a couple of tweets criticizing Mike Pence, calling him a coward, encouraging people to stay peaceful, remain peaceful, essentially saying, stay at the Capitol. It's fine. Just don't hit cops. And then it wasn't until 187 minutes after the Capitol was breached that he finally issued this statement, basically saying, "Yeah, we love you. The election's been stolen, but go home in peace." Praising the people that had stormed the Capitol. Those are the facts. And all of this time later, since January 6th, since our extensive investigation, no one has really questioned those facts. There's really no counter-narrative, credible counter-narrative that I've heard. Going back to the scene of the crime is hubris. Arsonists do that because they're proud of their work. And that's what we're seeing today. There's a hubris that he can get away with it, that he can return to the scene of that crime and generate the kind of sycophantic love that he's generating today. It's very similar ego-driven hubris that's motivating that visit.